Hi, my name is Chris. I'm here with Kay Yang and Kay Han looking for Project Group 12, looking at the question, is personality and player type correlated, and kind of what are the effects of that relationship, or how do you classify that relationship? And before we get too far into it, it's important to note some of the background and context, and I wanted to look at one of the main testing models, which was the Bartle classification of player type. So Richard Bartle wrote in 1996, Hearts, Clubs, Diamonds, and Spades, Players Who Suit Muds. And this is a paper which referred to kind of multiplayer online games, and the classification described players who play those. But it has also been expanded to single-player video games. And so it's kind of based on what they call character theory, and that the character theory consists of four characters: achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. And these are imagined according to a quadrant where x-axis represents the interacting with players versus exploring the world, and the y-axis representing preference for interaction versus unilateral action. Basically meaning interacting with other players versus acting solely on the world in and of itself. So in the first quadrant we have achievers. And these are players who look to gain points. You might be familiar with the term achievement hunters. They want to gain levels or equipment or concrete measures of succeeding in a game. And these achievers are found in a variety of games, although specifically we're looking at the taxonomy, like the Bartle taxonomy within MMORPGs. And I'll get a little bit into that later as to why we're solely focusing on that genre. The next we have is explorers. And then their tendency is to look around, explore areas, immerse themselves in the game world. They are often annoyed by time-restricted missions, and they enjoy finding hidden glitches or hidden Easter eggs littered throughout the map. So already you can kind of imagine as explorers being somewhat different than achievers, because achievement has a sense of completion to it, versus explorers, their sense of completion comes from finding that next thing, or finding something that other players haven't seen before, or maybe even sharing that, find on a forum with other players, but that gets more into the human interaction side, which we'll talk about later as well. Next, there are the socializers, and I was already kind of stepping into that with my last example. And these are the multitude of gamers who play games for the social aspect rather than the game in and of itself. And I've often heard that, to some degree, video games are just the fire around which we're all, gathering to talk and pass the days and catch up with each other and everything. But the important aspect to the socializer enjoys, interacting, exchanging, trading, talking, kind of growing communities. And so you can imagine these socializers in the MMORPG aspect as being, maybe guild organizers, or just very involved with the guild, or looking to find other players from their area, or, is open to join open queue matchmaking for other genres of games and things like that. And then finally, we have the killers. They thrive on competition with other players and prefer fighting them into scripted computer-controlled components. So the killers, in and of themselves, they enjoy like very PvP combat, kind of clashes, or anything that they can test their skills directly against another person, because unlike the achiever, it's not simply enough just to beat the game, itself. It has to be about beating other people at the game. So that's a bit of a rundown for the Bartle taxonomy of players. One of the reasons we chose the Bartle taxonomy is simply because there's so much literature surrounding it, and kind of research extrapolating the model and building upon it and doing other kind of models. So I'll leave my group mates to explain some of the kind of offshoots from the Bartle taxonomy, but I wanted to quickly highlight it as it's going to be essentially the foundation for the classifying player side of our question. So the next background piece of context I wanted to talk about was the personality model we're going to be using, which is MBTI. MBTI refers to Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it's a questionnaire that's used to indicate personality, in which to show how people would react and make decisions in the real world. The MBTI does, however, share variance with other measures of personality, which suggests that it may not be a unique measure of personality, or that it measures unique personality dimensions. meaning that different testing at different times may yield different, quote, personalities. And that's kind of why I included this picture here to show that although we're using the MBTI, it definitely has built-in limitations. And the personalities that you get from them, although they are distinct, may change for a given player over repeated testing. So if we were to make this into an actual proposal, that would definitely be an important
thing to consider. The other reason we chose the MBTI is that it appears in some of our secondary source analysis, like the Keirsey model, which my teammates will explain later.
So I wanted to make note that the games are the mediator of interplayer communication, and as such, the structure of the game creates the platform on which gameplay can provide interaction and communication among the players. So the degree that player type can be exhibited in a game is answered by the idea that gameplay mediates the behavior which is illustrative of the given personality of a player. All of that is to say, game design affords some constraints as to what kind of, how much killing a killer can achieve if that's their game type, or how much of an achiever can achieve, or how social a game is for a socializer type. So it's important to keep in mind here that when we talk about games and personality, it might be that a certain person has a certain player type and a certain personality, but they might be playing a game which limits how much that behavior and interaction is shown. So I think it's important to always keep in mind that the game structure itself also mediates what kind of interplayer communication and interplayer interaction there is. So essentially the concept of player type and personality can only be illustrated through game, and the game behavior can only be illustrated, in the medium of a video game. And so that's the ways in which the video game kind of builds the platform, as I've shown, that interaction and communication occur on. So the second thing I wanted to talk about really quickly here was about the process for the secondary source analysis. And so we looked at another paper because the Bartle paper is from 1996, and so it's a little bit outdated. We looked at another paper called The Relationship Between Players' Value Systems and Their In-Game Behavior in a Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. And the authors of this paper essentially took an MMORPG called Ghost 2, which is very popular in China, and got in contact with the developers of the game, and essentially put a questionnaire right at the beginning of everybody's login screen that you could, optionally do or whatever. And so you would fill out the questionnaire and answer things about your marital status and about your income and about your kind of beliefs system. Is it important to stay close to family? Is it important to do better than others? Or these kinds of things. And this assessment put them through what's called the culture view system. And the culture view system is what we're going to use as a proxy for the MBTI. Essentially, both of them just kind of examine how personality is generated by answers to questions about morality and about decision-making and behavior. And so we think that the culture view 6-color coded system is a good proxy in this instance. And the nice thing about this study is that they were able to work with the developers of the game to then look at all of these in-game effects, like what the character's magic level was, or what the character's pet level was, or how often they interacted with other players, or things like that, like a lot of back-end technical information that we wouldn't be able to get our hands on. And so just here is in table 4 is one of the example tables from some of our findings, just about what kinds of players play the most time, who has the most friends by time, who has the highest guild level, or is the most involved in guilds. And so as you can see, they are quite distinct. Like, for example, blue has the highest goodwill point by level. And so you can imagine blue might be more of a socializer character because these goodwill points are generated by kind of like commending other players. Anyway, so that's just a little bit of our secondary analysis there.
And here's Kayang.
Hi guys, I would like to start with the goal of this project first. The goal of this project is aiming to identify the relationship between player type and personalities in terms of several player taxonomy models. To be noted, types and personality are specific to research in the gaming field. Other models which do not specify into the context of video games will not be considered in this paper. Moreover, human interactions is the core concept of this paper, which specifically focus on online multiplayer game. And these models are basically what we use in the paper. The first one is called the Butler test, which is an online form of questionnaire to identify the player types by answering a series of questions that related to video games. The left one is called the MPTI test, which is also an online form of questionnaire to identify the personality of the respondent, but questions are not related to video games. And the right side and the right graph is called the 4 KRC temperaments, which is another model that builds based on the 16 personality, which is the MPTI test, to identify the player type. And this is what we call the KRC and Butler model. And this is the combination of both the Butler test and the 4 KRC temperaments that specify the relationship between player type and related personality. The last model is called the KRC and Butler diagram with DGD1 model overlaid. The which those gray boxes are drawn from the DGD1 concept, like these gray boxes. The DGD1 model is the refined version of the KRC and Butler model, which fills the gaps between two player types. Since no one is ever just one type, the DGD1 model addressed the issue through providing diversity and filling the gaps. As a result, the paper generates the outcome of a prediction of a player's personality based on its player type. If a player is identified to be a specific player type from the mentioning models, then at least one of those assigned personality is demonstrated by the player. However, gender, age, weekly spent in video games, game preference, and any other special cases are all significantly associated with the topic and result in different outcomes. Therefore, these questions are required to address in future research.
The results of our project were very interesting and helped us answer 3 important questions. The first question was, is there any connection between player types and personality? A study conducted in 2017 had over 1,500 participants, and it aimed to establish the relationship between player types, between player value systems and their in-game behaviors. The value systems can be seen in the table above, and they were used as a proxy for personality, which were then used to find a correlation with in-game behaviors. Based on the findings of this study, along with our analysis of other literature, we were able to establish a link between player types and personality. Our final report will contain a more deeper analysis of our findings. The second question answered by our project was, do two different player types share the same or similar personality? So my other team member previously mentioned the Kiersey-Bartle model, which integrates both the Myers-Briggs personality types with the player types model as seen in the Bartle test. So the Bartle test had 4 different player types, which we can see in the figure above, and the Myers-Briggs personality types test has 16 different personalities. So we can clearly see that there's an overlap with all 4 player types. For example, the socializer player type in the diagram is linked with the INFP, ENFP, INFJ, and ENFJ personality types from the Myers-Briggs test. And the same thing can be seen by, if we look at the other 3 player types, which is the killer player types. That's also associated with 4 different personalities. Explorer player type is associated with 4 different personalities as well, and so is the achiever player type. The last question that was answered by our project was, can a player type have a completely opposite real life personality? There are some studies in literature that does suggest that there might be specific instances where an individual's player type does not accurately depict their real life personality. However, context is very important, and so we found that those studies were looking at specific games and participants playing specific games only. So, for example, one of our final report will contain more deeper analysis, but one of the studies that we looked at showed individuals playing World of Warcraft, which is known to be a game where players can fight other players in game. However, that is an example of a game. That is an example of a game emphasizing a certain style of play. However, that does not mean that the individual's personality is depicted by the way they play the game. So, a certain style of play of a game can actually affect an individual's personality. So, therefore, context is always important, and this does not directly contradict our main goal of establishing a link between player types and personality. So, we learned a lot by doing this project. We took a deeper look into different personalities and different personality types, and being computer science majors, we were able to dip our feet into the world of psychology. This helped us learn more about the role human psychology plays in the world of computer science in general. Since our results suggest that there is a correlation between personality and player types, it would be interesting to see how personalities and behavior can, in the long run, be used in the field of psychology to further understand different kinds of personalities.
Thank you, Kehan. And I just wanted to talk quickly just that a correlation does exist based on our secondary source analysis. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a good evening.